You are listening to episode number 8. Thank you so much for joining us today. My goal with these conversations is to explore different types of people and their successes as well as their failures in navigating and mapping out their lives so that you too may have more insight in what it takes to build the life that you envision for yourself. I believe if you take action each day, the life that you want can be closer than you think. Welcome to Work That Out, guys, your guide to connecting authentically, living with purpose, and having no regrets. This is a show that gives you real stories and real examples of people working it out and creating the life that they want. My guest today is a writer, an editor, a communications professional, and even an activist. Ladies and gentlemen, today I invite you to really be a fly on the wall in this great conversation that I will have today with Dylan Sandifer. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have for you a very special guest, Dylan Sandifer. Dylan, how's it going today?
You know what? It's a lot happening in the world right now, but I'm feeling good and I'm glad to have this chance to catch up with you and talk to you.
Yeah, it's been a minute. It has definitely been a minute. So, I have such an array of different guests on the podcast. And so the consistent theme is I think in every person's individual life, there is an essence of what does it take for you to work these things out? So, people are like, well, what's the theme? Well, that's the theme, sometimes we're backed and pushed into a corner. And I just think your evolution, full disclosure, I just finished teaching high school theater, and I had someone who was working on backstage, and I was not informed enough to know that I used her dead name. Mm-hmm. Right? So now I'm old school. I don't really know what any of that means. So, which I'm going to give you a chance to talk about your evolution, but this sort of motivated me to want to learn more because I said, if someone like me who's in a same-sex marriage doesn't know these answers, how does anyone who's not, LGBTQ, how can they even begin to catch up? Because I feel like I'm decades, centuries behind. And so can you tell us just the evolution, go as far back as you want, go as quickly as you want, but who is the Dylan that sits before me today?
Sure, right. Well, first of all, I mean, before I go into my sort of like personal aspects, my personal evolution, like you say, you're in the same sex marriage, and yet, that doesn't necessarily mean that you like you're still learning too, right? I mean, I think that's the interesting thing. And we all have, things to learn, right? Whatever's not part of our identity. Like as a white person, I'm always learning, I can never have the Black experience. I'm just trying to learn how to be a better ally, right? And so there's this solidarity that has existed since the queer liberation movement, which obviously hit a peak at Stonewall, but existed before then, where, cis gay people, lesbians, and trans people, came together for this common goal. And in our current context, I would be remiss if I didn't, mention that was a riot against the police. But that's the thing, right? We've found a sort of political solidarity in coming together as a group to fight for our rights and our liberation. But that doesn't mean that we are a monolith, right? We have very different experiences, and some things are in common and some things aren't.
Right.
That's, I think it's great to admit, like, I can be part of the sort of LGBTQ plus community and not know about my trans, brothers and sisters and non-binary folks experience. So for me personally, it's really hard not to look back in retrospect and put meaning on things.
Right.
Especially like something like being trans. I mean, that's not a language that most of us have growing up, right? I mean,
especially not Longview, Texas.
Right, exactly. It's so wild that like we know each other from that context. Like it's
I
just a
know.
completely different world.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but you know, trans folks are everywhere, including in Longview, Texas.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, there are those things that now I can kind of look back on and say like, oh, that means something different to me now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I used to like sneak into my brother's room and get his football jersey out of his, you know, his drawer and put it on. And, you know, I hated like having to wear an Easter dress and hat. And I was always
Right.
fighting with my mom, you know, which are not necessarily only experiences trans people have, right? But, you know, I can look back with them and say like, there was always this discomfort, this sort of like alienation with being
Right.
socialized into the female experience.
Mm-hmm.
um and it's complicated too, because it's like I was socialized as a female, which especially in the South I think can mean certain things. And maybe it's not just a Southern thing, but just being socialized female in this world, right? You're kind of expected to be certain things. And so I have those experiences of not wanting to be too loud and take up, you know, too much
Too much
space.
space.
But at the same time, I wouldn't say I had the experience of a woman, because I have always had this disconnect with it, of it that not fitting me, the way that experience is commonly
Mm-hmm.
described, not fitting with me. And certainly me trying to fit in some of the more performative aspects of being female, makeup, hair, skirts.
Right.
I definitely tried, and if anything, I overcompensated. I don't know if you remember this from me being in high school, but I would wear like a full heels and skirt,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, to school. Like it was not a normal thing for a high school girl to be doing, but I was just like trying
Oh.
to
Oh, you would go
do
to
the
the
thing.
nines. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just which is like wild to me now. Um, so anyway, you know, I mean, I think because I didn't have this language, it was that much harder to find like how do I describe this experience. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I went through, and I also think that, you know, your identity can be valid even if you're at a point in time. Like for example, you know, so I got out of Longview, Texas. I went to college. My world really opened up, and I'll be forever grateful for that. I mean, you know, and so I started by identifying as a lesbian. um
A lipstick lesbian.
right. But then I
Overcompensating again.
yeah, but then, you know, I cut my hair off and I was, you know, I was a butch lesbian. And then
Yeah.
so you know, and then I kind of was identified as non-binary. And you know, and now I'm on testosterone, which you can be non-binary and take testosterone, but like I think, you know, I'm more and more leaning into identifying as a trans man. And I think that while of course you have to find it within yourself, at the same time it does help to have external validation. And it's very hard
Mm-hmm.
to feel like sort of the man that you know that you are when you're being misgendered and things are being assumed about
Right.
you, people see you. So in terms of my identity, you know, there's no perfect, I mean, language falls short every time, and there's a word can't encompass an entire experience, but it is helpful. And I'm glad that the dialogue and the discourse has opened up to allow for I think more exploration, without, and I, you know, and I'm in a bubble, this isn't true of every person in every space. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very lucky to be in places where I have been allowed this exploration without completely losing a sense of support and things like
Right.
that. But yeah, so it's been a journey, but it feels very empowering,
Mm-hmm.
um, while at the same time, you know, it being a very vulnerable position. There aren't legal protections. You know, you can be fired
Right.
for being trans. And you know, certainly on the street, it's especially dangerous
Mm-hmm.
for trans women of color. But you know, people
Right.
are killed for being trans on the street, right? So there is that aspect, and no amount of self exploration can change the structural issues.
Right. So do you think you always sort of deep down knew that you were a male? Like, you know, was that the mindset? You know, we were experimenting with all these other things with the lipstick, with the, you know, did you
Mm-hmm.
always feel like, even when you snuck into your brother's room and stuff, but like, was there always just a burning desire that, you know, I think I'm just male. I just feel more into that body.
I think it would be more accurate to say that I just knew that I didn't fit where I was supposed
Okay.
to. Like,
Okay.
I, I mean, I don't know. I mean, part of that is part of me not wanting to answer that directly as yes, is my just whole discomfort with these like very strict two boxes that we tend to split the society into, right?
Yes.
I mean, I still don't know what it means to be male exactly. I mean, like, I feel a certain sense of comfort with
Mm-hmm.
the sort of way that that's performed in the world and how I kind of view myself. But like, I mean, that's the thing about the gender binary, right? Is I don't think it serves anyone. I mean, other than, powerful cis males who have been the
Right.
benefit of like all of the power because of that. But I think that women are oppressed under a very strict binary of what they're supposed to be, because
Mm-hmm.
they are sorted into the box
Right.
of women as well. So I
Okay.
mean, I certainly felt like I never fit, and yeah, I identify more with I guess what we commonly think of as maleness. I
Okay.
know
Okay.
that sounds like a very roundabout answer, but
Okay, so let's break this down, because there will be people listening to this who go, half of the stuff that they're talking about is foreign. Like a lot of these
yeah.
terms, like for instance, so you are trans, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And, because you are an open book. Like I read your
Sure.
post today, and,
Yeah.
and you mentioned earlier that you're taking testosterone shots. So what does that mean for the person who has no idea? Because we live in a society where people are like, it's you're a man or you're a woman, and it's Adam and
Right.
it's Eve, and
Right.
what is this? I don't understand what you're talking about. So break it down to a level that a third grader, what is
Sure.
trans, even go. And so I remember when we went to Daniel's show in Austin when he was
Hedwig.
Hedwig, when he
Yeah.
was Hedwig, and the house recording came on and said, ding ding ding, please take your seat, or if you need to go to the restaurant, the restroom, there are the non-binary specific on either side, and we're like, holy shit, look at this. But again, you're in Austin, Texas, so what does it mean to be trans? What does it
Sure.
mean to be binary or even non-binary? Let's just
Hmm.
start there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so we're all assigned, right, the day we're born, the way our society works with a gender, and that's based on genitalia, frankly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And uh, so without going, and I could even complicate that further, but without going into too much detail, to again break it down as simply as possible. So we're assigned, a gender at birth. Trans simply means that you identify with a different gender than you were assigned at birth.
Okay.
You have transitioned, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean surgery and hormones. It just means you
Okay.
yourself have identified differently.
Huh.
Um,
I didn't know
so
that.
yeah, well, we're all learning here.
Yes, we
Yeah.
are.
So
Huh.
yeah, and so non-binary people can be trans too, right? Because if you're, for example, assigned, male at birth, and then you identify as non-binary, you've transitioned out of that sort of very strict
Why wouldn't
male
that just be
box.
trans?
Well, a lot of people see trans as kind of an umbrella, and non-binary falls within it.
Okay. Okay.
So trans can be, a trans male, trans female. It could also be transitioning to non-binary. And of
Mhm.
course, I just want to say, like, obviously individuals may like slightly interpret these things differently for themselves, but in terms of sort of the common wisdom and break for the sake of simplicity, I guess that's how I would describe it.
Okay. Okay. So what about, okay, so like as a matter of fact, a lot of students that I run across really like the word queer.
Mm-hmm.
And so people, like especially females, seem to identify with queer, I'm a queer
Mm-hmm.
woman, and that's something that I feel like has sort of come back around, kind
Mm-hmm.
of like the high-waisted pants have, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so tell me, like, why is queer such an important term now rather
Mm-hmm.
than just gay?
Right. Well, I think it acknowledges what I was saying earlier, which is language is always going to fall short, and it's going to erase sometimes some specific nuances. And I get for an older generation, especially that was yelled at as a slur on the street, that it can be very hard to see that
Yeah.
that people are embracing it so fully, but we reclaim a lot of words, right, that were once used against us. And that's an act of power. But yeah, I think part of it is because, as I was saying, like exploration is a little bit more, I don't know if allowed is the right word. And because of that, I think a lot of people identify with queer because it doesn't have to put you in a specific box, sort of within the acronym. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I think it's also helpful when we were talking about solidarity and working together, other than just on an individual level, right? Like you may be in a same-sex marriage and I may be trans, but we're both queer. I feel like that's very helpful. Like we can work together towards queer liberation, and and that encompasses the multitude of experiences that we have.
Absolutely. Tell me about that moment when you said, bam, here I am. Parentals, we got to talk. How did that occur, and was there any backlash from that?
Yeah. Well, I think like a lot of things that we try to talk about as being one moment, right? It's not just one moment, it's these small steps that you take along the way, right? You do it in these little increments when you feel comfortable. I mean, your theme, Work It Out podcast, whenever you see success, right? Like when people from the outside start seeing success, they see it as like, oh, you just did this one thing.
That one last thing.
Celebrated. And you're like, no, I've been working on this in little ways for years.
I've been working my ass off for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. Like all the failures and all of the backlash I had to go through. So I think it's like that, right? I mean, as I said, there was an evolution to my identity, and I kind of came out in these other ways along the way. So I mean, there's been both backlash and support at every turn. I do come from Longview, Texas. It's a conservative, fundamentalist Christian family. And it's not easy. And I think like that it's an eternal struggle to find where the line is between enabling your own abuse, might be strong, but enabling your own mistreatment and giving people a chance to grow. And
who are you afraid is going to hear this?
Right.
I don't want to name names. I don't want to talk about anybody. I'm just going to answer very generically.
Right, exactly. Like I don't know if I want to like go on the record calling anybody out. But, But yeah, no, and I get like new ideas are hard, but at the same time, how many chances do you give somebody? So I don't know. I mean, this also goes into, I think, being socialized into the quiet femininity of the South too, is like, it's kind of that waspy thing of like, we don't talk about these things. And so
right. But you're so vocal. How do you balance that? Because like right now you're like, I don't want to go on the record, calling anybody out. But my God, you were taking testosterone shots earlier,
Yeah.
So it's just the things that affect you and that you don't want to name names. And not that I'm asking you to name names.
Right.
So was it just yes or no? Were you accepted by your immediate family right off the bat?
No.
Okay.
No.
And so that took some growing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still not, I wouldn't say. I'll just say this. My parents don't call me Dylan. They don't use the right pronouns for me. And so, and even when I was just coming out as gay, it was this thing I hate that you hear Christians say a lot, which is like, I don't believe in it, but I still love you. And it's sort of like, how can you love me if you are compartmentalizing?
Hate the sin, but love the sinner, right?
Yeah, I absolutely loathe that shit.
I know.
And then it was like the audacity of like, well, just, we didn't cut you off, so you should be like grateful and give us praise for that. And it's like, okay, congrats for doing the very least. I don't think that's love. To me, that's not love. But anyway, so you have some of the stereotypical backlash. When I came out to people we know in common, high school friends, right? Like for the most part, it was in fact, if anything, it was kind of like, like they could tell I had important news, and they were like, are you pregnant or are you gay? Just tell me.
One or the other.
I know it's one or the other, so just tell me.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, cool, well, whatever. Like, if anything, it was almost dismissive, like we don't care, but on the other hand, there were other friends, who said like very stereotypical things like, well, I guess that's fine as long as you don't, when I was coming out as a lesbian, said that's fine as long as you don't cut all your hair off and become a boy, which is hilarious because so sorry to that friend, except
right.
you're not in touch anymore. But and some people were like, I just don't want to talk about it, like let's just try to be friends without ignoring it.
Let's pretend that elephant isn't in the room.
Right, yeah, which again, to me, that's not love.
Right. Okay, so do you find yourself, like, how often do you go back to Longview?
Just for like some very few holidays, I would say, and the occasional big like wedding or something.
Yeah, because I find myself like I don't go home as much, because I feel like it took my family a while.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, why I was so closeted for so long. But it makes it easier. So I know that you've made a home in Memphis, and so it makes it easier, and you feel more comfortable to be in an environment that's supportive of you, that encourages you, that inspires you, because you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And so sometimes when we get back to those people who are unaccepting, there's a tendency to pull you back into that closet. So all that to ask, what is it about Memphis? Because I feel like you're going to be there forever. You love it. And what is it about Memphis that makes you feel so at home there?
Yeah. There's just this really open environment where there aren't a lot of barriers to entry, I would say, for things. Unlike, and I haven't lived anywhere else in my adult life, so I don't have a personal experience, but unlike cities, at least, that have a reputation for like a lot of credentialism, like DC, like, like they want to see your PhD and whatever. Like Memphis is just very like, if you want to do the work, you can come and help us, you do the work,
Right.
I mean, it's a city with a lot of problems, and in a lot of ways, I think it's been part of my education and why I feel so passionate about a lot of these issues. The way that poverty and racism are, pervasive in our culture. I, it just has such a history. It has a certain trauma built in. But there's also, equal to that, a number of people who want to change things and want to do the work. And, I mean, I loved hearing that you were going to name this podcast Work It Out, because I'm serious when I say that, like, you made that a motto for me. Like, that really was memorable. And when I think of high school, in a lot of ways, I think of that as a motto. You don't get out of Longview, Texas and like become a queer atheist without a little bit of like work that out in you.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
So I think that, in a lot of ways, I think that's like what brought the friend group together, the friend group that like we were all your students. And so there's just a very, we call it grit and grind, but but there's a very work that out culture. Like, if you want to do this work, then do this work with us.
Yeah.
And some people have, I think, more responsibility than others to do that because of, power and privilege and things like that. But like, even the people who, don't have time, like, are doing the work here. And I just appreciate that spirit and that culture, that kind of like underdog, we're gonna go after it. I mean, like, I think at a national level, no one likes to pay attention to Memphis unless they're like calling us crime infested or want to whitewash MLK's legacy or something. The 50th anniversary was just a couple of years ago, and that's like the only time we got any attention nationally. And it was mostly about the past, not the present. So yeah, it's just been a really good place for me. I mean, I won't romanticize it too much. Like, there's also practical reasons. Like, the cost of living is extremely low, and I was like a poor, 20 something trying to
Yeah,
like an
yeah.
apartment, and I've been able to do that in Memphis. So yeah, but I don't know if I'll stay here forever as you predict, but I do love it.
No, you'll be in DC. Yeah, but we'll get to that later. So I find it, because a lot of people, like, and you sort of mentioned it earlier in the conversation about, just because you check one box doesn't mean you automatically can relate to all the other check boxes.
Mhm.
So what is it about, you're celebrating your 30th birthday in 2 days,
Yeah.
right? I know we're COVID and all this kind of stuff, but things have opened back up. But instead of, I'm 30, baby, whoa, going after it, you're like, I'm doing this virtual happy hour to raise money for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
What is the motivation for that? I mean, you can be doing so many other things, but here you are putting your time and energy, and you're not Black.
Yeah. Yeah.
I find
Well,
that so powerful.
yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. I mean, I don't want to make it too much about me. I mean, we're in this moment, especially, um, where I think we're finally, and by where I mean white people, having to come full on in confrontation with all the
Mm-hmm.
ways that we've benefited from, I mean, white supremacy, let's call it what it is,
Oh,
right? This
yeah.
idea that like everyone wants to think that they've accomplished everything on their own, and
Mm-hmm.
you know you can work hard and also have a job because you only were competing against white people, because in
Right.
reality no one was ever going to give that top job to a Black person. I mean,
Right.
this more than I do, certainly, but like I think it's just really important. I mean, again, like my whole organizing principle in life is just solidarity. It's already come up a couple of times. I can never truly relate to what it's like to be to be
Mm-hmm.
any Black person who walks the streets of America. Um, but I do feel like sometimes that feeling of alienation I was talking about earlier gave me a sort of sense of empathy that has made me sensitive to, even if I can't relate to an experience exactly,
Mm-hmm.
I I want to have solidarity with those people. I want to be a good ally to those people. Um, and I would hope for the same. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like a quid pro quo, but you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean in terms of like, you know, uh, and I feel so bad that I'm blanking on exactly who said this, but none of us are free till all of us are free, right?
Right.
So we're working for liberation for queer folks, for Black folks, and obviously those things intersect for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and class solidarity, all those things. So I think like in a lot of ways I'm grateful even for the harder parts of being queer and trans, because they made this sort of space for me to have a greater sense of empathy for the experience of anyone who's sort of like oppressed by the dominant structures that we have in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I would love to party, especially, if we weren't in a pandemic, I would like to do this in a physical space and raise money that way.
Yeah.
But I just feel a great sense of responsibility, because sort of despite the odds, I have found myself in a position of great privilege. I mean, I always have white privilege, but in terms of like, I was a first generation college student coming from a family that's fairly poor. Um, and I have a nice job now, and I live in downtown Memphis in a great apartment, and so I feel like there's a responsibility in
Mm-hmm.
that to use whatever I have.
Right.
So that's, yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's really important to feel that sense of solidarity, especially as more and more the sort of divides between us
Mm-hmm.
are growing in terms
Okay.
of like wealth inequality and you know stuff
Right.
like that.
Right. So let's transition to J.K. Rowling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and even before I was prepping for our conversation, I had seen, I'm not on Twitter, but
Yeah.
Shelly is. And so
Yeah.
every now and then she'll go, oh my God, look at this. Oh my God, look at that,
Yeah.
But so she said, what was it that she said? People who menstruate, I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out. Womben, Wimpun, Woomud, like what are these
Yeah.
damn terms? And then she goes, I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of trans. At the same time, my life has been shaped by being female. I do not believe it is hateful to say so.
Yeah. It's a lot to digest. I mean, she does it in this very typical white woman way where it's like, believe, like, bless your heart, believe me, I love you and I'm
I'll
on your
march
side
with you.
and I march with you, and then goes on to be like, but you shouldn't exist. So yeah, and then she wrote a blog post today which I actually haven't read because I just don't think I can take it. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, she's been hitting it for the last 6 months or so, that she is transphobic, which unfortunately is becoming a pretty common position in the UK in particular among women.
Transphobic?
Transphobia is really
Okay.
rampant in even so-called progressive women's
Does that mean
spaces
you have
in
a
the
phobia
UK.
against trans? I mean, if I just break that down, against trans people?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
prejudice, yeah,
Yeah.
like homophobia. So
Okay.
so I haven't read it, so I can't comment specifically on the blog post today. But yeah, I mean, it's disgusting and heartbreaking for someone to use their power and privilege. I mean, she's written like the most
Yeah.
successful children's book ever. She has this platform now and she has billions of dollars, and she can't find anything better to do apparently than punch down at a very vulnerable group in society. And my
Mm-hmm.
fear is that she's going to normalize this position as something to be discussed and debated. Like, not that people already don't have this prejudice,
Right.
but the way that she's framing it as a threat to women, I think is completely antithetical to the reality, which is, which came up before, which is that I think the very strict gender binary has hurt women as much as it's hurt trans people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a breadth of women's experiences that don't fall neatly into the box that they've been pushed in,
Right.
more than I was pushed in that box, as a
Mm-hmm.
woman, socialized as a woman. So I mean, it's disappointing to see anyone use their power to hurt people that are much more vulnerable than them.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I just think that trying to couch it in this like, well, this hurts me as a woman, but actually we're still on the same side thing,
Mm-hmm.
is what I think makes it really dangerous, because it can be very effective, right? It reframes her as the victim and it makes people sympathetic to it, you
Yeah.
know? And that's really dangerous. Like, someone just coming out and being like, I hate trans people because you're gross and you're not real, is one thing, and it's bad, obviously. But the specific way that she's operating under this like guise of victimhood is just, I mean, it's just really unfortunately effective, which is why it's so dangerous.
Of course. Yeah. So we've seen a lot in the news, as because of George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
mainly, just so many more things are coming to light.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it mean to you? Like, because I had all these questions about, oh, we're going to defund the police department. We're going
Mm-hmm.
to, cut its legs out from under it. What does
Mm-hmm.
that mean to you in Memphis? Because I know they did that in
Yeah.
Camden, New Jersey, and started over, and they're like, oh my God, we're better for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the very every city has its own very specific political landscape, even if it
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of things in common. And Memphis, like most American cities, has a completely outrageously outsized police budget. Police is something like 40% of our whole city budget. And this is one of I mean, we have the second poorest zip code in the nation in Memphis. I mean,
Really?
Memphis is a majority Black, very poor city. But unfortunately, it's run by mostly very rich white
Mm-hmm.
people. And so I'm hopeful for this moment that we have normalized conversations about defunding and abolishing the police.
Mm-hmm.
And and I hope those things are successful. but yeah, no, I mean, I'm not an expert on prison and police abolition, even though I've I've paid attention to those movements and I support those movements. So I won't claim to be one. But I mean, we've already defunded so many programs in cities already. Um, Education, there's such a huge disparity in schools, and majority Black neighborhoods get so many fewer resources than wealthy white neighborhoods do because of
Right.
property taxes, right? And so it's acting like people don't understand what the word defund means. Well, we've already defunded libraries, education. Like we're already very familiar with what it means to defund something, right? It's just lowering the budget.
Right.
And to me, I see that as a step to abolition, right? Of hopefully the whole prison industrial complex, and mass incarceration. And so I think that the fact that we're having these conversations, I mean, these are pretty, the ideas have been around a long time, but they were considered radical like a week ago, right? And now everyone's talking about them. So I think that shows
Right.
the power of a social movement, and I think that's great.
Absolutely. What do you say to someone who comes to you, and I've seen examples that it's white and it's Black, which is so mind blowing to me that Black people, so in reference to George Floyd, we all
Mm-hmm.
are aware of how he died, his last
Right.
8 minutes and 46 seconds. It came out on the news today that he knew Chauvin, like they worked
Right.
together
Right.
and they had
Right.
beef.
Right. Which is very suspicious, and I think
Oh,
upgrades it to like possibly first degree
Oh,
murder.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I'm like, so you still have these people who are, it doesn't even, assign it to color, but you still
Mm-hmm.
have these people who are like, oh my God, he is not a martyr. He is not a saint. He's a thug. He didn't deserve to die, but he deserved to be in jail. What do you say to someone who comes up to you with that perspective and that attitude and that opinion?
Right. Well, it's like if you're Black and you get killed, suddenly it's your fault, which is outrageous, right? He didn't kill
Right.
himself. If you put your knee on anybody's neck for 8 minutes, they're gonna die.
Mhm.
And so I think it's outrageous, but it's so common, right? I mean, even the disparities in, like, you watch your local news program. If you see a Black person on there, it's probably going to be a mugshot, right? And that doesn't mean that Black men are doing any more crime. It's just these prejudices we have
Yeah.
in our society that get replicated time and time again. I mean, at the same time, you'll have, a white college student proven to rape someone. I mean, Brock Turner, raped someone behind a dumpster and
Yep.
only got 3 months. And the whole conversation was about, oh, his lost potential. Well, he, you
Just
know,
should he
he
rape somebody?
right, he raped somebody. He made his choice and he deserves consequences for that. So, a white man does something horrible and it's all about his lost potential and what a good thing.
Mhm.
I mean, even Ted Bundy, I remember the judge at his trial, when he sentenced him, said something like, "Oh, you could have been a great lawyer in my courtroom and it's just such a shame." And I'm like, he killed like
Don't
a
talk
dump.
about his untapped potential.
Right, exactly. But meanwhile, they say, he was no angel, when a Black
Yeah.
man is killed by police. So, I mean, it's just obvious, racism. And in terms of let's not play. I think some people just like troll us, right? Like, let's not play. We know the difference between, when someone is killed and when someone is the perpetrator of that crime. Like, people love to use the passive voice of like, oh, he died, and I'm like, no, a
Mhm.
police officer killed him. That, you still have responsibility, that even if you
Right.
put on a badge. And also, we can also look at the numbers and say, okay, but this thing happened disproportionately, like in terms
Mhm.
of, oh, it's Black and white. Like, some people will try to detract and say, right, like, well, police kill white people too. And I'm like, well, then good, maybe that's your end for getting mad about it. But also, let's look at how disproportionately it's Black people that are killed with police.
Right.
Let's look at how disproportionately Black people are put in jail by design,
Mhm.
right? I mean, they,
Mhm.
obviously criminalize these things on purpose to try to get Black people into prisons and
Yeah.
basically reinvent modern slavery. Shout out to, Ava DuVernay's 13th.
Oh yeah, yeah. I had a lot of friends who are like, I just watched 13.
Okay, good job.
Woo. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then and everybody feels very overly motivated to put out a statement about it, which I think
Right.
I know there's a responsibility, but like even all like other coaches have to go, oh, let's have a round table about it. Trey, are
Mhm.
you coming? No.
No, I already know all of this. I live
Already,
it.
right.
Yeah.
Why need to come and participate? You people have that round table,
Right. And the
and
thing is, like, we all already knew that there were like, white people already knew that these were problems. We just are now being forced to confront it in this very public way.
why do you so that's a great transition, right? So looking at the stance in our country, and I don't want to lead you any particular way, because I don't have to do that, but one of your tweets, you said, driving into protesters is not an accident. It is widespread tactic we're seeing by white supremacists across the country. Why do
Hmm.
you think people are feeling so brazen even more now by the minute in
Hmm.
2020?
Hmm. I mean, I think part of it is the president of the United States he ran from the very beginning on racist dog whistles, um, just out and out fascism, in my
Yeah,
opinion. And he's catered to these groups, he's empowered these groups, he's made it normal. I mean, let's be clear, white people were saying this behind the scenes to each other all the time,
right.
but now they'll say it in public and take this action in public in new
Hmm.
ways.
And yeah,
um
and dare us to
it,
do something about it.
yeah, exactly, because they say, like, who's gonna, do you think the DOJ is gonna bring hate crime charges against me in this
Right.
administration? No, they're
No.
emboldened by it. So I mean, at the same time that these last couple of weeks with George Floyd and all of the
Hmm.
uprising that's come out of it, we've normalized some conversations that should have happened a long time ago, and some movements that I'm glad are getting attention. But at the same time, in the last 3 years, also at the same time, what's been normalized is that just out and out open white supremacy and white supremacist violence.
Right.
And those things will always be at play. You hear this sort of myth all the time of, like, well, if just like the older generation dies out, like the new generation is like more progressive and things are going to go away on their own or something, which is absolutely not the case. I mean, that's the thing about these white supremacists driving into people from Charlottesville to
Hmm.
all over the country in the last week. Like, these are mostly young men, right? And it may not
Right.
be a 1-to-1 ratio, but there's still this rampant white supremacy because we haven't seriously addressed it. And until we change those systems, there's always going to be people who are empowered by it and want to continue benefiting from it, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
White people
Yeah.
benefit from white supremacy.
Right. And so something that I have never been able to separate in my mind, and I've always been able to do it before until now. Like, I mean, when I lived in Texas, like for one presidential election, I'll admit it, I voted for George W. I thought he had, as governor of Texas, he had just given us a $3,000 teacher raise. So I'm like, yes, he is speaking to me. I voted Republican, for that presidential. I think that was probably the only time in my life that I have. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've always been able to separate, political issues and religious issues. I find it harder and harder now with this guy with 45 in the White House, mainly because now I've gotten to a point to where I automatically assume if you're voting for him, you feel exactly the way he does on every single issue.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but it's just like the economy. Look at my 401k. I don't give a fuck about your 401k.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what he says about people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just feel like I can't overlook it anymore. How
Mm-hmm.
does that affect you? Like when and I know that, probably Longview
Yeah.
there are a bunch of Trumpers there,
Sure.
I have friends that I still call in Texas who are Trumpers,
Mm.
and I just can't get past it. How
Mm-hmm.
do you get past that?
Well, I don't. I mean, I mean, I can disagree with someone about, like, whether, Mad Men is a good show or something. I can't
Right,
disagree with people about whether, like, Black people should be able to walk through the streets without being killed,
right,
or if, like, the Jews are to blame. I mean, he's just saying these out and out fascist. Like,
right.
it's just like a flashback to the 1930s. I mean, I know that's overused, but in this case, like, this literally is that moment.
Hmm.
um So I don't get over it. I mean, I find myself more and more trying to find, I alluded to this earlier, try to find a line in terms of like, I do feel like it's my responsibility as a white person to kind of call in other white people and try to see if they're willing to engage and learn and grow. But at the same time, I can only do that over and over for so many years until I say like, fuck it, you're in the, sorry, you're in the mess, and you're obviously not willing to come out of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, your point about religious and political, the religious and the political being intersected is interesting because, you know, as I said earlier, I grew up in this very fundamentalist white evangelical religion, and those things have never been separated. I mean, ever since the Reagan era and probably before, I mean, he very particularly rebranded conservatism, right, as being this kind of very conservative evangelical Christian
Right.
movement. And so those things are very intertwined. And that's how, you know, he was like, as long as your checkbook is okay,
Yeah.
don't really worry about what else we do, because just promise me that we're God's party, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
you know, so those things are very intertwined, and I think they're like reaching a certain fever pitch now where the like fascist impulses meets that white evangelical conservative branch of the party that has just been radicalized and radicalized by the far right until like we're here today, and it's all coming to a head, and Trump stands in front of a church that he doesn't even go inside holding up a Bible and
Upside
calling
down and backwards.
right, you know, and he called it 2 Corinthians a
What
few
the?
years ago. Like he's
Yeah.
never read it. Like
Yeah.
I do not believe he's ever read a Bible,
I
but
don't think so.
I don't want to make it ad hominem, like his religion is his whatever, but he's just so obviously using that base,
Well,
you
yeah,
know,
and
to
they love that.
and they love it.
Yeah, look at the
They love
Christian he is. Look at him holding a Bible.
because he's saying everything they've wanted to say in public, and
I
that's the
know.
whole truth of it, you know.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
He
That's the
speaks for
game.
them. You know, there was a certain part of me that I never believed. You know, like I remember when he was running for president, I never thought he would win. First of all, I thought Hillary had that. I did, and which was part of the
Yeah.
problem because we all assumed. And
Well,
I
I mean,
just,
and she did win by 3 million votes. And I don't say that to be like a sore loser. I mean that our system is fundamentally broken.
Oh,
when
it
you can
is.
win by 3 million votes,
Right,
and
but
not
still lose because of the
but anyway,
electoral college. I
yeah,
know, such an antiquated. Yeah, I know. But what I really originally thought, you know, because you know, I don't own it. Well, you know, I'm a coach now, so I'm self-employed, but I don't own this
yeah,
big corporation.
sure,
And so all I knew about Donald Trump was that he was, you know, you're fired on The
right,
Apprentice.
right,
And so I was like, okay, so once, you know, which I knew he was spewing a bunch of just racist, but I
mm-hmm,
really thought he was doing a lot of that stuff just to get votes. And I said,
mm-hmm.
oh, when he gets in there, he really is going to be more democratic than anything. Boy, was I wrong. And I think that
Yeah,
was me trying to wishful think and wishful hope.
sure,
And, you know, and I say this all the time. Michelle Obama said, her quote, the presidency doesn't change who you are.
mm-hmm.
It reveals who you are.
That's absolutely right.
And I just can't believe where we are. So, you know, I mean, you and I can agree on this all day long.
Right,
Let's talk about how this pandemic,
yeah,
how it's affected you
yeah,
and your emotional health, and just, you know, because you tweeted the other day you've been in that one room for three
yeah,
months. That
yeah,
one room because you should have gotten a house rather than that studio, you know.
right.
So yeah, so how has this whole pandemic affected you?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm sure it's been difficult for everyone. Yeah, I did. I rented the studio a year ago, and so other than a few errands and lately some protests, yeah, I've been in the same room with me and my cat. And I think it's really underlined for me the importance of support networks and
Mm-hmm.
also physical touch. I mean, we have all these great digital tools, and I'm
Right.
so grateful. I mean, right now, you know, we're talking
Yeah,
over Zoom.
yeah.
And in some ways, it's made me realize, even though these digital tools existed, I didn't. Often I felt like I mostly needed to stay with people in Memphis and just would occasionally call some other friends on other things.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, why haven't I taken better advantage of the fact that I can talk to
I
anyone in the
know.
world at any
Anyone.
moment? Like,
Yep, yep.
so in that ways, it has underlined what's important, and that we do have these tools to connect. But at the same time, you know, physical presence is very important. I'm an overly sensitive person. Like, I don't say that as a good thing. Like, I'm overly sensitive, but a lot
Mhm.
of that, a lot of my association with people is very much reading body language, reading the slightest,
That's the theater in you.
right?
Yep.
Is that you? Is that you?
It's
Yeah.
just the
So I miss
theater.
that. I miss that. Miss being able to take those cues and read off of
Yeah.
them. There is something to present. So, I mean, I struggle with mental health on a good non-pandemic day, but it has been difficult being alone all the time. And yeah, I mean, in some ways, I started to get used to it. I think uh, my ups and downs aren't as bad as they were at the beginning when I remembered a different world to miss, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to reach out to people as much as I can, and I think people
Mhm.
have been really resilient and really creative in terms of, Netflix party and Jackbox games and
Yeah.
Zoom happy hours, and so that's helped for sure.
Right. Oh, that's perfect. I, on the other hand,
Hmm.
have loved it.
Yeah,
How
really.
crazy is that? You know why? Because I found a new version of myself that is okay with saying no. And I used to be the person, because I would just become a chameleon for whatever group I was hanging out with.
Mm,
If you need me to be the comic, I'm going to be that for you tonight. If you need me to be over dramatic, we're going to play whatever it was. I'm going to be that
yeah,
for you.
yeah,
So I didn't have to go, oh, I got to go hang out with such and such, or, because I
yeah,
generally say yes. So there
yeah,
was none of that. So now it's gotten to a point where I was like, I'm good. I
yeah,
like, because again, I'm not alone. And so it's been really nice. The only thing I would say now, I've put on probably like 15, 20 pounds
yeah.
that I cannot get rid of. So I would say that's the downfall part of it. But it's allowed me to get clarity on
That's
my
good.
path. It's
Yeah.
allowed me to tune into who I am,
Hmm.
So, something that I do as a coach, and I've started meditating and everything, and then sometimes I do extra training. And as part of some of my coaching training, we're supposed to do this 4 hours of just do nothing, like no talking to anyone. There's no
Wow.
phone, no, yeah, just, I mean, you can go for walks, you're not supposed to sleep,
Mm,
but 4 hours of just, and let me tell you, I haven't been able to do it. Today I took Cayenne and Basil, the dog and the cat, to the vet,
hmm.
and because they're doing curbside pickup,
Hmm.
I was able to sit in the car for 30 minutes, no radio, no
Mm,
one, because it took them that long. And
hmm.
so even then you become aware of your thoughts.
Yeah.
You read this one sign that says boom, 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 somebody, oh, Trump supporter, that was on the corner, automatically. So we're triggered by all these things. And so, but what happens if you would just like, let's just turn it off? Let's
Hmm.
just have a non-digital evening.
Hmm.
So if you're doing those things, what else can you do that's happy, that makes you feel good, where you're not thinking about the hard stuff, where you're not thinking about political, all this kind of stuff? What are you doing when you're turning off your computer, you're turning off your phone? What are you doing for Dylan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'll be honest, I'm not good at that. You've referenced my tweets. Like, I'm basically constantly tapped into Twitter or some kind of screen. I have taken up just a few minutes of meditation. I'm trying to
Mm,
increase the amount of
yeah.
number of minutes that I do that every day. Um, but I do skip days, and I'm very bad at unplugging. And I think part of it is, confronting thoughts that you've been trying to avoid is a very difficult thing to do, right?
Yeah.
um you know I don't have any good answers. I would say I've also, and it's gone downhill in the later years, in the later days, I mean, of the pandemic, feels like years. But I had also been getting more in tune with my body, and getting more exercise, nothing intense, but just getting more exercise, and just kind of like listening to what I needed, trying to make sure that I
Right.
wasn't just eating, but being nutritious, and also
Hmm.
just like trying to be self-aware enough about my feelings so that I would reach out to someone before
Yeah.
it got too dark, like that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and so I would just say, like, trying to build a support network around me that's stronger, um, and meditation, and and just and just also like not feeling guilty for not being productive all the time. I think especially
Yeah.
working from home during the pandemic, all of the boundaries are really blurred between when's work time and when's home time, especially again because I'm literally in one room, right? I have
Yeah.
like a work quadrant and like a home quadrant and a sleep quadrant.
Hmm.
So I think like all those boundaries which already get blurred, I think sometimes especially with your phone's email chirping at every hour of the night, um is has always been hard. But I think trying to separate myself away from that and being
Hmm.
like, this time is just for me and I'm not going to check work emails, and if I just want to
Yeah.
like veg out, I'm not going to feel like, oh, this is what I should be doing right now.
Right.
It's more of a if anything, it's a mindset
Hmm.
of like allowing myself the freedom to just be.
Right. And so is that something that you're struggling with? That whole
Yes.
mindset. Okay.
Yeah.
So when those thoughts and those beliefs keep coming up, what are you
Hmm.
doing to sort of, not that, I'm not a person who believes that, oh, we got to confront every single thing we've ever
Sure.
been through, but I
Right.
am a proponent for reframing it,
Hmm.
and so I realize that, as much as I hate to admit it, sitting here talking to you, that for a long time I had a very fixed mindset.
Hmm.
And I would have argued to the hills that I didn't.
Yeah.
Not until I started working with clients, I was like, oh shit, that's me,
Yeah.
that I've actually worked with this. And so what I find that works for me, like I'm doing a
Yeah.
challenge where I meditate 3 times a day.
Oh
And so
wow.
there are some times when I go, damn it, what are people going to think if I put this out there? What if I do a live right now? And then I realize my thinking is controlling it only
Hmm.
because I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid of being criticized. I'm afraid of looking like I'm not credible. And
Right.
so I already know that about myself. And
Hmm.
so I immediately take a moment and I go, okay, thank you for that wake up call,
Hmm.
brain. Thank you,
Right.
subconscious. And I go, yeah, I might be a little nervous, but you know what? That nervous energy is going to fuel me. I'm going to be a better speaker today. So
Wow.
I'm getting much better at reframing that. So I don't ignore it anymore, but
Hmm.
I just reframe it in a more positive manner. And then I'm recognizing it's when I haven't, when I've sat down in front of the computer too long. It's
Hmm.
when I haven't planned to exercise and I've just been doing that
Hmm.
one thing. So just getting up and moving your body and just making it a proactive kind of thing will
Hmm.
also help. So maybe that's something that
That's
could help.
helpful. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's helpful. And I'm really impressed with you being so aware and being able to break those things down. And yeah, I definitely will think about incorporating some of those things because I don't have a good go-to to get myself out of those thoughts. And
Yeah.
I'm really bad at pushing down my feelings and not
Hmm.
addressing them. So
Yeah.
so that's helpful. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Are there other things that you reframe? Like, you talked specifically about like nervousness and kind of fear. Are there other things that you reframe, and how do you reframe them?
Let me tell you a big one. This is a
Yeah.
big one.
Yeah.
Okay. And okay. So I've had this issue. I didn't realize until I went through this journey the last couple of months. My entire life, I've always been afraid of getting cancer. My
Wow.
entire life. When I would drive to school, like there was an MD Anderson Cancer Center on the right,
Hmm.
and I would be like, don't look that way, you're turning stone. Don't look at that, you're turning stone. And
Wow.
there's never been any cancer in my family, but subconsciously, I've always been afraid of getting cancer. And then
Mm.
what do I hear in January? You
Mm.
have cancer.
Wow.
And but let me tell you the crazy part about it. This is really, I've always hated my breasts.
Hmm.
I feel like it was cancer allowed me to get the body I've always wanted. Now I'm ready to get rid of this belly,
Right.
but through cancer,
Right.
I was able to,
Wow.
I was never gonna have top surgery. I
Right.
don't come from that culture that allows that
Right.
to be okay.
Right.
So I always had those thoughts, whether I realized it or not. And I
Hmm.
remember I came to that realization. As a matter of fact, I was on a coaching call with my coach.
Yeah.
And I cried like a baby. I was like, holy shit, because that was so big. And so
Hmm.
now in reframing that,
Hmm.
I put that into motion. I made it
Hmm.
happen. And so now I'm like, thank you. Cancer
Wow.
happened for me.
Wow. And you have power over your own narrative too. That's great.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I'm
Yeah.
such a believer in that, and
Yeah.
so when I meditate, I
Mm-hmm.
meditate on, I want to reprogram my subconscious to
Mm-hmm.
align with the desires of my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whatever it is that I'm feeling and living through my values and aligning through those things,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's to be pain free and healthy for
Mm-hmm.
every day, whether it's to get more clients, whether it's to, be of help to someone each day of my life,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is, coming from a very, very pure place. And so, whenever those thoughts come up, I ask myself, okay, is that one of my values? My top values are love and connection.
Mm-hmm.
Am I being loving and am I connecting with someone in an authentic manner right now? And so
Mm-hmm.
that just automatically goes because it also goes, am I being loving to myself?
Right. Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, so that totally keeps me aligned. And when I fall, when I try to go off of that line, not on purpose, I
Right.
just keep going back to that.
That's so helpful. Has that taken practice? I mean, is that something that
Yes.
you, yeah,
Oh, totally. I mean, you
yeah,
you have to be, yeah, this is every day. Like this challenge I'm
yeah.
doing for 70 days. I'm on day 46 with meditating 3 times a day. It's
Mm-hmm.
total practice. I journal. I journal
Mm-hmm.
my thoughts. And it's practice and it's beliefs. Because for
Mm-hmm.
most of my life, I didn't believe, even though you probably would go, yeah, you did. I didn't, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm really good at acting. I
Yeah.
always appeared to be probably one of the most confident people in the room.
Yeah.
And I wasn't.
I would have said that. Yeah, I would have
Yeah,
said that.
yeah. But I could always turn it on,
Yeah.
but I still, like, I remember, feeling judged and feeling like I wasn't enough and I wasn't smart enough and I didn't have all the answers. And I still fight through those things right now because
Mm-hmm.
I'm still going through, will people think I'm credible? Because, I went through this whole thing was, well, I've been teaching for 24 years. Now I'm jumping ship to do something else. But I've been coaching for 24 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't make a difference. I just expanded my learning,
Right.
so I'm like, why am I trying to discount that? I shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
That is just extra experience. And so, yeah, it takes total practice. And I'm very deliberate. I'm deliberate in how I spend my time during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what my body needs and I wake up with those plans. And so if you put, like, if you had your ideal day and there were like 12 to 16 things, you're like, I don't have to go to work, I don't have to do such and such, I get to do all the things that make me feel in absolute flow, incredible. What are those 16 things? So
Mm.
you make that list
Yeah.
and then you choose. You can't do all 16 every day,
Right.
but you pull like 3 or 4 from that
Yeah.
list, and ones that are consistent with me is meditation,
Mm-hmm.
exercise,
Mm-hmm.
a midday nap,
Mm.
and usually a beer. And so I bookmark those. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm feeling a little stagnant right now and I'm not being productive. Let me go lay
Mm.
down because my midday meditation and then I go into a nap. And then I'm
Wow.
like, it's a new day.
Yeah.
So
That's so
yeah.
helpful. I feel like I'm getting a free training session here. So.
Yes.
Thank you for that advice. The whole world is going to get that. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Great.
let's turn this back to you because I really, for what I see for you, I really think I'm gonna be voting for you one day. What do you think about that? Do you have any aspirations?
Well, whenever people are on the major cable networks, some senator being asked if they're going to run for president, they always do that like wink and a nod thing where they're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's not about me. What am I?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? So maybe you're right because my impulse is to like hedge a little bit. I have thought about it. A lot of my work that I have done has been very background. I mean, I've worked on political campaigns, but obviously not as the candidate. And in my regular professional jobs too are more sort of backgrounding jobs. I would say writing is the thing I've done that where it was most about like me and my voice,
Yeah.
which I enjoyed. But so yeah, I've thought about it. I don't know. I mean, the undercurrent of everything you were just talking about was vulnerability, right? And that's so difficult. And there's very few things more vulnerable than being a candidate, especially the way our news cycles work, where
Oh
you
my
put
God.
out your whole life for people to dredge through.
Yep.
And I'm not proud of every day of my life. And God knows I don't want to be asked questions about every facet of my journey, on the news every night. And So that in some ways sounds mortifying. And so, but I have thought about, because I think politics are really important. If I'm not the candidate, I can see myself working on policy,
Okay.
and trying to change that. I mean, they're just so, I don't know of any other way of making change which has the potential, now it always doesn't work out this way, but has the potential to directly affect as many lives as the government and the state does, right?
Yeah.
And the more, like when I look back at historical precedents, I mean, FDR did some horrible things, but he also completely reinvented the country in some radical ways with the New Deal. And, we have many of the same circumstances now. And I think and I'm grateful that people like AOC are in fact, proposing what they're calling the Green New Deal. So it's an obvious parallel there. But there's just like, no one has as much money as the state, right, to put into programming that could change people's lives, to just give people a social safety net so that they don't have to work 3 jobs and still live in poverty.
Oh goodness.
So I don't know if I'll run for anything or not. I've thought about it. I'm not counting it out, but I can see myself pivoting to policy, and or politics work. So you're right on the money there, but I guess it's really no surprise because it's, half of my feed all day every day is politics.
Very cool. So we're going to wrap up shortly, but I
Yeah.
do want to touch on your post from December 31st, where you said you hope that people find contentment, all their needs for resources, love in all its forms, and growth. Have you found those things yourself?
I am working on it. I think the love in all of its forms is particularly important to me in this moment. I think that whenever you don't find it in the ways you're hoping to find it in the places that you're looking, in your family or in relationships that have gone bad or whatever it may be, there can be a tendency to think that there's something wrong with you and that you're not worthy of that kind of love and that you're not going to find it. And so I think reinventing what I see as my support networks and finding people who can like kind of be on this journey with me, even if it's not who you would expect, I think is important. And so I'm just trying to be open to that and trying to be that person for other people to whatever extent I can. So
perfect.
Ask me next year.
Ask you next year. You're going to be in that place, in a special place. That's so good. What does the next 10 years of your life look like? If you, because most people will be like, I don't know. No, you can know. Planning. What is that path? What does it look like for the next 10 years? What are some couple big things you hope to accomplish that you will? We don't have to hope, that you will accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to feel responsible for some meaningful change, by which I mean both in my life and in the world. And I think that can take, in some ways that's vague, but in another way, I think that's really important because it is really easy, and I'm guilty of this, of just kind of like letting life take you and letting happenstance dictate where you go. And I don't want that to be my life. So I both want to take control of my own life by choosing a new career or choosing a new city. And I also want to make some sort of meaningful change for the world. So if I do go into policy, maybe that's a policy that I see passed. I'm in very much a moment. I think part of it is the pressure of 30, even though I know it's arbitrary and it's still young. There is this idea of like, I'm leaving my 20s and maybe I haven't done everything I wanted to do. So there's this pressure certainly that comes from the inside, not the outside. But and I'm very much in this moment where I can see some big changes for me. And then I'll just be really honest, like, again, vulnerability. I always feel like I don't want to admit this, but I want like a partner, I do. I want that. Like life is hard, and being in this pandemic room alone has only encouraged me to see how important it is for me to have someone, not that I need to survive, I can be on my own, but have that person who I can call up and that we can support each other and make it easier, right?
I get that.
I definitely want that. So 10 years seems like long enough for me to find that.
Yes,
Right?
yes. Sooner rather than later. I think you are a gift. You will be a gift to anyone that, I mean, I've always admired you, and I especially your voice that you have, your platform, I mean, I can't even imagine what people will pull out of the closet, your skeletons,
Oh
because,
God.
oh, I know, but, I know there's always something because that's been one of my biggest fears, but,
Wait,
I,
I just have to say, like, this is so beautiful because, I mean, it means so much for me to hear you say that you've inspired me because, I mean, like, let's just make a love fest for a second. I mean, you were a huge influence on me and, especially, like, you were unlike anyone I certainly came into contact with, in Longview. And it was just so important, the way that you pulled together the people who are still friends of mine to this day,
so
and the
crazy.
way that which is wild, and the way that you modeled that independence, that work it out spirit, that, like, I don't want to hear it, figure it out for yourself, you're smart enough, just
Yeah, you have all
don't
the
come
answers.
complaining to me, you have the answers, go find them. I know, I really appreciated it, right? Like, you did not
Yeah.
coddle us, and that has been
No.
really helpful for me. So I mean, I've admired you for a long time. Actually, I was thinking about it. I'm pretty sure I wrote my college admissions essay about you.
Oh,
So
wow. Wow. Oh, that
it
touches
would
me
be
so much.
it would be hilarious to go try to drudge that up from the files
Yeah,
somewhere and see what I wrote. But anyway, so I mean, this is the great thing about keeping lifelong
yeah,
relationships, even if you only check in every once in a while,
yeah,
is that you get to find, now that I'm an adult, we're both adults, finding this mutuality and this
absolutely.
mutual admiration is like what it's all about. New
Yeah,
relationships. So
absolutely. I love that. And I need you to know, I am always here for you. And so if there's ever a moment where you feel like you're struggling, you call me up, we'll do a Zoom. I am always here for you. And I would love to help you in any way, like get those thoughts
amazing.
under control, whatever it is.
Amazing.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're
Absolutely.
gonna we're gonna be in touch.
Okay, good, good. So for our listeners who just have fallen in love with you, where can they connect with you? Because you're going to get that partner. Here we are.
Well, I guess as I've already admitted, I am on Twitter basically 24/7. So you can find me on Twitter at jdillon901. And also that's my Instagram handle as well. So feel free to message me on either of those platforms. And yeah, looking for a politically motivated life partner. That's a small ask, right? Come hit me up.
Small ask. You don't ask for much.
Yeah, yeah, just someone to spend the rest of their lives with me and support me through.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah,
Oh,
this
this
is gonna
has
be
been
a great
incredible.
story, though, if that actually were to happen. This would be a
Oh,
great
I
story.
know. And then we'll come back and do another interview.
Perfect, perfect.
Nice. Thank you so much, Dylan. I
Thank you.
appreciate your time. I know we went long. We had some technical difficulties, but I love doing this. And I love feeling like the only thing we're missing is like sitting in a bar having some drinks.
Next time.
Next time. Okay.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. If you want to know more about what I'm up to, head over to traviastewart.com. If you like seeing the videos of the podcast, every episode is on my YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, please do me a favor and subscribe to the show. And remember, life is about connecting authentically, living with purpose, and having no regrets.